all. Thank you for stopping by on the inaugural edition of Kilroy's Key 3. Now, what is Kilroy's Key 3? Well, I'll put a link in the description to kind of an overview of what I plan to do with this series, and it might change over time. But one of the two key facets of it are, number one, I'm just looking at games in my collection. I've done numerous top 10 lists over the years back on BGG as NAP 16. But this one is just going to be limited to games in my collection that I've played, and so have enough experience to talk about them. And it's limited to 3, of course. I'm not going to go into 10 like I used to do. It's going to be down to 3. Sometimes it's hard to find 3 on a topic. And the second aspect or second facet that I'm going to try to do in this series, I'm going to really try to look at my point of view. And what is my point of view? Well, other than it's objective and or subjective, I should say. It's my subjective point of view. But point of view stands for presentation, operation, and value. And I kind of go into a little bit about what that means in the overview that's linked down below. So what am I covering today? Well, I'm covering World War I New to Me in 2022. So it's not the best World War I games of all time, or, strategic or tactical or battles or anything like that. This is new to me, games that are covering World War I in some aspect, and they're new to me in 2022. Now, they might have been published in 2022, at least one of these was, or I just got a hold of them or just got around to them this year. So that's the subjective nature of this. So what are we looking at today? World War I, new to me in 2022. Well, first off, we're going to go back to 2021, which this was a Charles S. Roberts Award winner, Verdun 1916, Steel Inferno. We're going to come up to date a little bit in 2022, Imperial Tide, the Great War 1914 and 1918. And the surprise in this whole thing is Great Salvo War from Minden Games. Now, how can that even compete with these? Well, looking at all the World War I games I played for the first time in 2022, these are the ones that jumped out to me, and I thought I'd talk about them a little bit. Now, this is Kilroy's Key 3, so we got to get out the chest of keys to start awarding these bad boys on my point of view. So, off the bat here, looking at Imperial Tide, Verdun, and Great Salvo War. Imperial Tide is strategic in nature. It's based on the Pacific Tide system from Gregory M. Smith, and so it owes a lot to that system. And there's been other games that have been released, and I think he's even working on a American Civil War game in that system as well. But this is strategic level, card driven, point to point. Verdun 1916, as I said, was the Charles S. Roberts Award winner. This is dealing with the Battle of Verdun, so this is more at the tactical level, but it's done in a somewhat abstract way. There's no counters. There are cubes and the like that are used on the board. And Great Salvo War from Minden Games, the second edition, this is a solitaire World War I naval game. And it has a little bit of do-it-yourself type aspect. You have to cut out the counter, copy and cut out the counters, or you can buy a set of upgraded components from Minden Games to play it. But it's focused on tactical naval battles in World War I. It has several in the book, plus it's very easy to make up your own. So we have a strategic, tactical. Actually, this is somewhat operational maybe for this battle, and this is tactical. So we've got kind of the 3 levels in this game as well. So let's get to my, and these are the best that I have played in the World War I. There were some close ones out there. But I'm not going to go into. I'm going to try not to go into honorable mentions too much in these. I might end up falling prey to that, but I'm trying to keep these relatively tight. So let's look at my point of view. The first one is presentation. So in talking about presentation, Let's look at the maps here first. Both Verdun and Imperial Tide come with mounted maps. That's a plus for me for presentation, and especially in games like this where there's not a lot of counters. So, and this doesn't have any counters at all. But if you have a lot of counters and a lot of stacks, then maybe a paper map with a plexiglass over it might be required, but or better suited. But this, a mounted map really works well for this game. This is a Verdun, and it also works very well for Imperial Tide as well. There are counters, but there's not a ton of counters. They are, it's a point-to-point type game, kind of a la Paths of Glory, but this is all card-driven. And, the counters are nice. There's not a lot of information on it. They're more like, strength factors or combat factors, and they're not. They're more of placeholders on the boxes as opposed to bestowing a lot of information about the different unit specifics. As for Great Salvo War, this is a do-it-yourself. So this one is kind of lacking in a board and in the components because you have to copy them and make them yourself. So that one is kind of on the outs with respect to presentation. Another thing about presentation is the cards. One thing that Verdun I think got a lot of recognition for was its artwork. Each side has their own deck of cards. And the artwork is very unique to this game, as you can see here. I like it. I can see how some people might not like it, but I really do like how they did the artwork between some of the archival photos to illustrations and the like throughout there. So. And this is a barrage, and that these are the cards that you use in the game. So I kind of like the cards in Verdun. That's one of the things that kind of tips the scale for it, I think, and that was the case I think in the Charlies. There's also cards in Imperial Tide. This is a card-driven game, so the cards are the game, and there's a whole system of how you pull the cards in and how you use them. But if you're familiar with any of the Tide series, then you're going to be, used to these kind of cards. And they're serviceable. They got decent photos and everything. But I think the cards for Verdun added over a little bit more. So in that regard, the counters are nice in Imperial Tide. They're fine. They're serviceable. They're good. They punch out nice. This is a compass game. And in Verdun, you use these blocks, and these blocks are going to stand for different formations on that game board. So, if I were to give anyone, the keys on this, I would probably, I think I'd probably edge out Verdun, for the keys on this presentation aspect of the game, with Imperial Tide coming in a very close second on that. I just think Verdun has a little bit more to it with the cards and the like, and with Great Salvo War kind of coming in third there. So if we're going to pull into the keys here, I'm going to give 3 to Verdun, 2 to Imperial Tide, and 1 to Great War Salvo, barely getting 1 there. Next we turn to, that's presentation, turning to operation. Imperial Tide is somewhat of a procedural system, especially if you're playing it solitaire. There's very much a procedure to it. Great War Salvo is a solitaire game. It can be played multiplayer, but it's really more of a solitaire game, and there's somewhat of a procedure to that. Verdun is a little bit different, with the blocks and the cards. It plays a little bit different than your typical war game, and so in that regard, how are the rules and coming to play there? This one's pretty close. There were things about each one of these rule books. Actually, Great War Salvo was relatively clear, but it's kind of crammed into a small spot, and the game is relatively simple. So I kind of take that into play when I'm looking at how the rules convey the game, given the complexity of the game. And so in that regard, I'm probably going to give it to Imperial Tide a little bit of an edge over Verdun in that regard. Great Salvo War does fine, but it does. There's a lot of optional rules too, so you kind of figure out what you want to do when you by what kind of game you want to play by how much you want to add on. So in that regard, I'm going to give Imperial Tide. Let's give them a couple of keys, or let's give them 3 keys because I kind of put them a little bit over the edge. Verdun, I'm going to give 2 keys, and then for Great War, they get a key for operation. Now for value. Well, value is very subjective in that regard. For war games, I typically try to look at the simulation value of it. How well does it simulate the circumstance? But in this case, I might go a little bit more into the playability or the fun side. On games that are non-war games, I'm probably going to look more at, does it sit with the theme and is it fun? Imperial Tide is relatively abstract in some regards. I mean, it's simming the strategic level of World War I, but it's doing it with these cards, and it's doing it in somewhat of an abstract way. So, query how much sim value is in there. However, I did have a good time playing it. Verdun, on the other, is abstracting it another way in how it's doing. It just does a unique way of how it's handling that battle, and does it differently. The Great War Salvo is somewhat abstract as well. In how it's doing it, because it's doing it in a very simplified fashion. This is the one where I'm kind of again, it's subjective, right? But I'm going to go with Great War Salvo. I've played Great War Salvo more times because it's portable, it's easy to get out there, and it's solitaire. So unfortunately for the other two, I just got that to the table more and had more enjoyment with it. So I'm not necessarily saying it's simulating naval combat better than Imperial Tide is simulating strategic, or Verdun is simulating operational per se. I'm just saying I had more fun with Great War Salvo. So I'm going to give it the 3 keys. The next one I think is going to come to is Imperial Tide with 2, and then with Verdun with 1 key for value. So looking at my presentation, operation, and value, my point of view for these 3 games, which were new to me in 2022, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keys for Verdun. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keys for Great War Salvo. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys for Imperial Tide, which is going to tip the scale to Imperial Tide for this round here. As I said, they're 3 very different games. They're dealing with different scales. They're dealing with different treatments. However, they are similar in not only dealing with World War I or aspects of World War I, but they're also somewhat abstract, or have abstracted some of their operations more than you would see in some of the other traditional hex and counter type games. The interesting thing here is none of these are hex and counter games, which I find very interesting. I always like seeing new treatments and new points of view into wargaming. So that's where I come out with. If I don't think you can go wrong with any one of these 3. I did like Imperial Tide. I've played it predominantly solitaire, and like it in that regard. I need to get it opposed a little bit more. Verdun is a really good experience. Unfortunately, I haven't got that to the table as much as I've gotten Imperial Tide or Great Salvo War, so that suffering a little bit from that. But I mean, don't take my word for it. It did win a Charles S. Roberts Award, so there's definitely something there. Plus, if you like this art and presentation, then this is a no-brainer to try that one out. War Salvo, I just can't say enough. This is probably my favorite of the Minden games. I just like the simplicity of the system, how you can get right into a battle, and you can do ship on ship, or you can do multiple ships, and it's really not that complex. You can add on some more rules over time. But the downside of Great War Salvo is that it's somewhat do it yourself as far as components and compactness of it. So anyway, that's what I have for you today as far as Kilroy's Key 3 for World War One, new to me in 2022. Imperial Tide basically or barely tips the scale and wins. I should put it down this way so you can see it, and wins the day. Thanks for stopping by. A little bit of bonus material. These are some of my World War One games that not all these are new to me in 2022, but I'm overly shelved, and so this is some of my overflow and where I put some of my World War One stuff. And here, this is my I've done a video on my Uncle Theo. That's his flag, and just recently I found his hat. I went up to visit my mom and dad, and they gave me his hat. I'm not sure how they got a hold of it, but there you have it. Good old Uncle Theo. I'll put a link to his memorial video in there as well. But a little bit of bonus material for you. Love to know what you think about this segment. I'm sure you differ on World War One games, but again, these are games I own and games that are new to me in 2022. So there you have it. Again, I'm running out of space, everybody. Maybe I need to start doing some giveaways. There you go. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.